gentlemen, a very warm Allston welcome for the Mayor of Boston, Martin J. Walsh.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I want to thank Chris. I too want to thank the Parks Department for the great work that they do. There's a lot of people here, so real quickly, Brian Golden, thank you very much for your great work. President Drew Foss, thank you for the partnership over the last 3.5, 4 years. Been incredible. Thank you for that. Katie Lapp from Harvard, thank you very much. I'm going to get you general in a second. I want to thank members of the I want to thank the members of the Public Realm Flexible Fund Committee. Thank you very much that are here today. Thank you for your great work. The Harvard Allston Task Force, thank you very much. All the local athletes that are here today. When I say local athletes, I'm talking about those of you that told me when I walked into the park, I hung out in this park and grew up in this park. So there's a lot of athletes in here. So I want to thank you all for the great work that you've done. To Mark Siomo, City Council Mark Siomo, who actually helped with this project as well because of allocations from the city budget. Thank you, Mark, for your great work. Mike Moran and Kevin Honan, thank you as well for your advocacy consistently throughout the community. We spent a lot of time out in the neighborhood today and spent a lot of time in the Allston Brighton neighborhood in the last 6 months. We're either cutting ribbons or breaking ground, so that's good stuff. So thank you very much. I also want to give a special hello to Mike Rush, State Senator Mike Rush, who's the chairman of Veterans Affairs in the State House for the Senate side. Thank you, Michael. I especially would like to thank the family of Major General George William Casey, including his son, General George Casey Jr., who's here with us today. Thank you very much. Today is a very proud day for all of us, and particularly in this community. We're getting to work on a park that will serve this community for generations to come and pay tribute to a true Boston hero while we're at it. As we talk about this a lot, we talk about, who's our heroes in life, and oftentimes people talk about athletes, and not that they can't be role models and heroes, but when we talk about heroes, we really should be looking at who are real heroes. And General Casey was a native son of Allston. He was a patriot and a rising star in the Army who gave his life fighting for this country, for our country, so that we could continue to have the freedoms that we have today. Throughout his incredible career, General Casey maintained strong ties to this neighborhood. He lived with integrity, with strength, and with the love of community that makes Allston such a special place and neighborhood. When Smith Field is complete, the Parks and Amphitheater will be dedicated to General Casey. It will be a great space that will bring this community together, something General Casey would have wanted. The entire renovation of this field will provide more ways for this community to play, celebrate, and enjoy nature. Soon neighbors will also have access to a new state-of-the-art playground, a water feature, public art, a new pedestrian path, well-lighted facilities for hockey, basketball, and so much more. I'm proud of the city's investment in this project as well. Our investment is about $5.5 million. So I'm grateful to everyone who made this possible. I want to thank Harvard as well for their investment, because this truly is a public-private partnership. The Harvard Allston Task Force, thank you for thank you for what you do. Oftentimes you don't get credit because you're meeting long hours, and sometimes you have a little debates. I know that once in a while, and then sometimes you have elected officials that come in and add a little more debate to it. So I want to thank you for your work on that. The Harvard Allston Public Realm Flexible Fund, thank you for all your work as well on it. All over the city, as Chris said, we're making major investments in our park system. They are the gems of our neighborhood. They will make our communities healthier, and they will bring people together. We believe that parks are for everyone. That's why we're making so much effort in making all of our public spaces more accessible, more safer, and more fun for all. When we work together to create amazing results for our communities, this field is an example of that, and the amphitheater that's going to be built here is an example of that. I'm excited to continue our teamwork throughout the renovations, and I look forward to coming back here next year and enjoying this new park with all of you. Now I'd like to introduce to you somebody who I've had a great relationship with as mayor for the last 4 years, and I know that oftentimes there's tension between the universities in our city and the community in our city. And I have to say this, at least speaking for me, President Faust has been a remarkable person listening to the community and willing to understand, willing to be able to make those changes, adjustments to make sure that the community is respected. And I'd like to ask her to come up here and say a few words.
Thank you, Mayor Walsh. I'm very touched by those words. It's really a pleasure for me to work with you as well. Commissioner Cook, elected officials, Director Golden, members of the Harvard-Allston Task Force, members of the Casey family, friends, it's wonderful to be here with you today. This is the kind of day that explains why we all live in New England. And it's also a day to celebrate the very important partnership between Harvard, the City of Boston, and the Allston community. I want to commend Commissioner Christopher Cook for his very attentive stewardship of the planning process for Smithfield. And I want to extend special thanks again to Mayor Walsh, whose thoughtful leadership makes partnerships like this one all the more possible and all the more meaningful. Smithfield is a very special place at the heart of a very special community. It's a community that has been steadfast in its commitment to enriching and enhancing this neighborhood for everyone. The vision and the energy that all of you bring to the ways that we can engage together in shaping shared spaces is really inspiring, and it has given such energy and momentum to our work together. As we stand here, I think about the many opportunities for partnership, learning, and collaboration that happen just across the street in the Harvard Ed Portal, where every day we see Allston residents working alongside Harvard faculty, staff, and students to share innovative ways of learning and to enjoy expanded programming in creative and performing arts, in science and technology, wellness and recreation, economic workforce, and professional development. I'm thrilled that the park we celebrate today builds on this work and on the partnership that we have forged together. I want to thank the members of the Public Realm Flexible Fund Executive Committee for enabling projects like Smithfield and for advancing the original vision of the Harvard-Allston Task Force, a community further connected by vibrant public spaces and a hub of civic and cultural activity. The investments we make in Smithfield are investments in our shared future. And I'm pleased that the future of this park will also reflect some shared history as well. When the park's completed, Smithfield's amphitheater will be dedicated to General George W. Casey, who, like Boston Planning and Development Agency Director Brian Golden, was raised in Allston. General Casey also spent time at Harvard in both undergraduate and graduate studies, and I just learned that he also used to sell programs at the Harvard Stadium. This was part of his life before he so honorably served in the United States Army in World War II and Korea, and ultimately gave his life in Vietnam. His name is listed in Memorial Church in Harvard Yard among the Harvard men who made the ultimate sacrifice in service to our country. I'm pleased to know that his example and legacy and memory will continue to inspire not only future generations of Harvard students in Harvard Yard, but also all of those who come to enjoy this beautiful space. It's an honor to be joined this afternoon by General Casey's son and daughter-in-law. And I'm particularly glad to welcome General Casey back to Boston because he and I have known each other for most of my time as president at Harvard. He was a terrific advisor and support for me in my earliest days. And so it's great to see him back again. And I understand he really is partly a Massachusetts person anyway, since he spends his summers here. We are here today because, like the Casey family, we recognize the power of service and the value of community. Public parks like this one provide an important reminder of our responsibilities to our environment, to our neighborhoods, and most importantly, to one another. I know that Smithfield will only help to strengthen the ties of campus and community that are so meaningfully connected here in Allston. And I'm so delighted to be here as we recognize the quality and the power of our work together. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Madam President. And again, as the mayor said, it was the community working with Harvard that really drove the investments into this field that allowed the elevated design. And if I could give a quick shout out to the designers, Stantec, who've done a beautiful job in creating these renderings to be able to put us into this place for the groundbreaking. So if they could get a nice round of applause, they've done wonderful work working with the community. And then with the leadership of the mayor and the elected officials, whether it was Councilor Siomo or Representative Holman or Representative Moran, and working with and making sure that the investments that we make are actually reflective of what the community's desires are. And that is reflected in the Ed Portal across the street and Harvard's commitment in this neighborhood. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Executive Vice President Katie Lapp of Harvard University.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to join the mayor and President Faust in congratulating all of you to bringing this day possible. Certainly the mayor with his leadership over 3 years ago committing the dollars for this project, the commissioner for his hard work, and certainly my boss, President Faust, who really was committed to making sure that this project got underway. So I want to thank all of them. And I can say that being across the street from the Ed Portal really is really appropriate. That is a great program, and we see this as the front yard of the Ed Portal, bringing the programming on beautiful days like today into a space that will be provided to the community to continue to kind of collegial activities with our community and all of you. And we're just so excited to be here. And I want to also acknowledge Trader Joe's that will be opening in the next week or so here in the Samuels project. Very excited about that. So thank you again, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker has to pay double duty, which is fine, because he's going to introduce the speaker following that. But we have an extraordinary partner at Boston Parks and the Boston Planning and Development Agency. Great density, great growth can result in great parks, and great parks are reflective of the people who are around it. But that only happens if there's an agency that's engaged and actually listening to the community. And so as buildings sprout up throughout our city, we have the opportunity to create dynamic, beautiful open spaces. Nowhere has that been more apparent than under the leadership of our next speaker. Please welcome to the podium the Director of the Boston Planning and Development Agency, Brian Golden.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Mayor Walsh. Thank you, President Faust. Thank you, Katie Lapp. Thanks to my colleague at City Hall again, the finest, most passionate Parks Commissioner America, Chris Cook. Thank you for gathering with us today. To all our friends, our neighbors, whether university personnel, whether residents, active folks, people who live in the neighborhood and care deeply about this park, thank you for gathering with us on this beautiful day to celebrate two historic things. And they really are history. First, Harvard's historic investment in this neighborhood. This park is almost literally the connective tissue between our neighborhood of North Allston, North Brighton, and Harvard University. It joins the university physically and the neighborhood. But for much of its history, there was little meaningful relationship between the two. That has certainly changed, and we see it all around us in concrete, meaningful ways. The actions, the spirit, the relationship are all different between the neighborhood and Harvard, and we thank you, President Faust, for that wonderful part of your legacy as leader of the university. The second piece of history involves Major General George W. Casey and his family, who were so much a part of life in North Allston and North Brighton for many decades. We're grateful again that many of them are here with us today. When I was deploying to Baghdad as an Army reservist in 2005, Ellie Hollum stopped me as I was leaving Mass at St. Anthony's Church, 3 blocks from here in Allston. And Ellie's here with us over here in her beautiful reddish pinkish coat on the far end of the third row. But Ellie wished me well that day and told me to look for General Casey when I got to Iraq. I asked who he was. She told me that he was a general in a significant role and that his father was from Franklin Street, 1 block from the church on whose stairs we were standing. She then told me that his father was also a general in the Army and that he died in Vietnam. All of this was astounding to me. I had never heard this story, though at that point I'd been in the Army for more than 10 years and I'd lived near the Casey homestead within a block and a half for my entire life. So when I got to Iraq, I did meet General Casey. In my first conversation with him, he told me about visiting his grandparents on Franklin Street and buying baseball cards at the old First National store immediately beside their house at the corner of Franklin and Holton. I learned later more about his father, a student at Boston Latin School, Harvard College, and ultimately graduating from the United States Military Academy at West Point. I learned about his service in Korea, the Silver Star for his service at Heartbreak Ridge in Korea, and his ascension to command of the 1st Cavalry Division, the storied 1st Cavalry Division, before dying in enemy-occupied territory while flying to visit wounded soldiers in Vietnam. Since then, I learned that lots of neighbors knew the story of General Casey and his family. His mother was from Franklin Street, a McDermott, and his father was a doctor at St. Elizabeth's for decades, and he delivered a whole bunch of babies for families in this neighborhood. I still run into some of those products of his delivery efforts. But there was no memorial of any kind to Major General Casey to ensure survival of his story. So some of the folks active in the local VFW, the only remaining veterans organization in Allston Brighton, people like Bo Fredericks, Bob Dunn, and Phil Guilfoyle. Phil's here representing the Post today. Thank you, Phil. They began to talk about what should be done to tell the story of General Casey, to make it easily accessible to all. And with the support of the broader community, manifested in a petition drive, and the enthusiastic support of Mayor Walsh and Commissioner Cook, we are here today to place a memorial amphitheater at the center of community life. Major General Casey lived the truth that there can be no greater love than to lay down one's life for friends. He lived a life of heroic service and complete unconditional sacrifice. He was one of us, and he must continue to be one of us. Part of our history, our consciousness, and our identity. Major General Casey will be a source of great pride in perpetuity. The amphitheater will be accompanied by a beautiful bronze portrait of General Casey. It will be a work of the noted sculptor who's done work at Boston College, the Harold Conley statue in front of the Taft School that Representative Kevin Honan led the effort for. The sculptor is Pablo Eduardo. He's from the North Shore. This sculpture has been generously funded by Boston College, and I would like to extend sincere thanks to BC President Father William Leahy and his team at BC for the support of this memorial element. People will congregate here. They'll visit with each other here. They'll enjoy performances and ceremonies here. They'll cheer for their kids in Little League games. But General Casey will not only be remembered by those who come here, his story is more than remembering. His story will exist here as a challenge to each one of us who visits. Whether you are new to this neighborhood or you've been here for your whole life, the memorial will ask you a simple question. Are you living a life today that is worthy of his sacrifice? And maybe that prompts each one of us to be a little more selfless, more engaged, maybe braver, maybe more committed to doing good during our time on this earth. Hopefully, it causes us to think and act differently and for the better. So thank you to the Caseys. Thank you to General Casey's wife and General Casey's mother, who can't join us, but will hopefully find joy in the knowledge that her husband is being remembered in the neighborhood in which he was raised. We certainly look forward to seeing her at the dedication of the memorial next summer. It's my pleasure now to introduce General George Casey, Jr. General Casey graduated from Boston College High School, Georgetown University, and was commissioned an officer in the United States Army in 1970. He rose to the rank of 4-star general, serving as commander of the multinational force Iraq from 2004 to 2007, and as Chief of Staff of the United States Army, the nation's highest-ranking Army officer from 2007 to 2011. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome General George Casey, Jr.
Thanks very much. Thank you. What Brian didn't say is that in that meeting in Baghdad in 2005, that was the first time we talked about the possibility of something like this happening. And I will tell you that if it wasn't for Brian's persistence and perseverance and that of his entire family, it never would have happened. So Brian, thank you on behalf of everyone. Mayor Walsh, President Faust, congratulations on a great collaboration here, and thank you for providing the opportunity for my dad's recognition. And the fact that it's only about 400 yards from the house on Franklin Street and within sight of Harvard Stadium, where, as President Faust said, he sold programs during football games, makes it all that much more meaningful for us. You know, when I came up here, one of the first people that I ran into was Ellie. And Ellie grabbed my hand and says, "I want to tell you about your grandparents." And so we will. We'll talk about that in a minute. As I thought about this memorial, while it's a great recognition for my dad, I also thought that it was a great recognition of the Casey family, of the Allston community, and of the valiant men and women who fought so well in Vietnam more than 4 decades ago. Dad's family was a second-generation immigrant family from Ireland. His grandfather, Thomas Wynne Casey, left Ireland when he was 18 to make a better life for himself in America. He arrived in New York on the 4th of July, 1871, with an 8th grade education and not much else. Yet in 10 years, he had saved enough money to marry a Boston girl, Julia Scully of Charleston. They settled in New London, Connecticut, and raised a family of 7 children. Thomas understood the value of education, so he ensured that all 7 graduated college. Dad's father, John, graduated Colby College and Columbia Medical School, took a residency, and as Brian said, came here to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, where he served as the director of medical services for decades. And the chances are that if you're from Allston or Brighton, and you're my age or older, Dr. Casey may have brought you into this world. He too met and married a Boston girl, Elizabeth McDermott, and they did settle on Franklin Street, where they began to raise a proper-sized Irish family of 7. 5 boys and 2 girls. And I really believe that their story of service is representative of the stories of many other Allston families from that era. Both girls attended Girls Latin School. Mary graduated from Boston University and Betty from Boston State Teachers College. All five boys attended Boston Latin School and Harvard. And pressed by my grandfather, 4 of the boys took ROTC and were commissioned out of Harvard. My dad, as you heard, went to Harvard for a year and then on to West Point. So all 5 boys served in the armed forces. 4 in the Army, 1 in the Navy. 3 served in World War II. Tom in the Pacific with the Americal Division at Guadalcanal and Bougainville. He later went on to occupation duty in Japan. Ed served in France and Germany after D-Day, pursuing the German army across Europe. And John served in both services. He received a Silver Star, that's our 3rd highest award for valor, for his actions at Guadalcanal. And he received a Bronze Star for his actions in Germany. 2 of the brothers, Bill and my dad, served in Korea, and my dad served in Vietnam. During World War II, Dr. Casey never charged the priests and nuns from the parish for their medical care. The deal was he'd take care of them if they prayed for his sons. And it seemed to work out okay because they all returned safely from World War II in Korea to successful careers in advertising, Jack and Bill, in business, Tom, and in law, Ed. Mary, the oldest daughter, went on to run the remedial reading program for the Norwood school systems, and Betty went on to raise 5 wonderful daughters. Dad's parents and his siblings have all passed away, but they're represented here today by generations of Caseys. And welcome, everybody. Great to have you all here. So Dad graduated West Point in 1945, and I see a trend here, married another Boston girl, my mom, Delane Morton. He was the love of her life, and by her own admission, she pursued him shamelessly. Well, she caught him, and they raised a family of 5 children, my brother Peter and my sisters Joan, Wink, and Ann. Joan and Ann are here today with their husbands, my wife Sheila, and our brother-in-law Dennis. Dad graduated from West Point too late for World War II, and he was relegated to occupation duty in Japan. He went on to serve in Korea, where he received, as you heard, the Silver Star for his actions on Heartbreak Ridge. And then after assignments in the Pentagon and Army bases across the United States and Germany, he served 3 tours in Vietnam, where he received 2 more Silver Stars before he was killed on the 7th of July, 1970, in a helicopter crash with 6 others. He was, at that time, leading the 1st Cavalry Division in their very successful operations into Cambodia. And he was on his way to visit wounded soldiers from that operation at Cam Ranh Bay. Now, I know a lot of people are watching the Ken Burns documentary on Vietnam. And so I think it's common knowledge that generals and journalists didn't get on too well during that period. So as I struggled to find a way to describe Dad as a person and as a soldier, I found it striking that it was a journalist, Frank Reynolds of ABC News, who had captured him the best. And I'd like to close with this commentary by Frank that ran on the ABC Evening News on the 9th of July, 1970, while Dad was still missing. It seems fair to say that professional soldiers are not at the top of the list of the most admired men in America these days. For many people, just to hear the words, the generals of the Pentagon or the generals in Vietnam, is to think of heartless types, concerned only with personal glories, caring nothing about the men they commit to battle. Perhaps that was not an entirely inaccurate image of high commands in past wars, but it is completely wrong in the present one. In the last 2 months, both the United States and South Vietnam have lost general officers who were wholly devoted to their troops and to their profession. General Nguyen Viet Thanh of the South Vietnamese Army was killed in a helicopter crash a few days after the operation into Cambodia began. South Vietnamese generals are generally thought of as a bunch of corrupt smugglers or black market operators, and unfortunately, some have fit that description. But there are exceptions. After General Thanh died, it was discovered that his entire estate consisted of a few sets of fatigues, 1 dress uniform, a wife, and 7 children. No villa, no Swiss bank account, not even a motorbike. General George Casey, the commander of the 1st Air Cavalry Division, now missing in Vietnam, was one of those men who had soldier written all over him. There was no trace of the martinet in him. He was a man for whom the responsibilities of high command were much more important than his privileges. He accepted all of the first. He abused none of the second. General Casey and General Thon knew war and hated it, perhaps more than the rest of us. They were splendid examples of military men who were not really militaristic. We don't give them much credit these days, as some of us shout and all of us long for peace now. But it's still an imperfect world. And the time will certainly come when not only will the George Caseys of this world be needed, they might even be appreciated. I can tell you that George Casey has been appreciated today and by the city that he loved. So on behalf of my mother and the entire Casey family, thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you for sharing that story with us, and obviously thank you for your service as well. We already heard about the generosity and the commitment of Harvard University, and we've heard about the generosity and commitment of the city of Boston, and by extension, its people through the allocations of the capital process and the city of Boston's budget department. But I also want to thank the developers in this neighborhood, especially Samuels and Associates. If you could give them a round of applause, who've committed no less than $700,000 to this first phase, and we're very grateful for that. I also want to thank Boston Properties, who's committed money to make sure that we have extraordinary public art in this project. So thank you to Boston Properties as well. And we already heard the generosity of Boston College, and we're very grateful for that as well. I will remind everyone that this is the first phase of Smith. And so if there are other developers who are interested in continuing this great relationship and this feeling that we have today, there are many opportunities to partner with the Boston Parks and Recreation Department moving forward, and by extension, the Allston community. But at this time, I'd be very honored if all the speakers and the elected officials could please join us for the ceremonial groundbreaking. Congratulations, everyone, on this groundbreaking of Smith Field. Thank you so much for joining us today.